In the realm of quantum mechanics, there is a concept called the Pauli exclusion principle. Does anybody remember what that is? Were you paying attention in 7th grade physical science class? I wasn't, so I had to look the definition up again. Here it is, the Pauli exclusion principle. Two identical fermions, which are particles with half-integral spin, cannot occupy the same quantum state simultaneously. Right? You got it?
Got it.
Okay. Or in terms that I can understand, two cars cannot occupy the same spot on the road at the same time.
That I got.
Well, I'm glad. In our Proverbs passage this morning, the summary verse, which is verse 6, is built on a practical and spiritual variation of this principle. Abandon your simplistic ways and live. Walk in the way of understanding. That is, there is not room in your life for simplistic or foolish ways and wisdom or understanding. There was a classic movie released in 1932 called The Western Code. Does anybody remember The Western Code? It was Saturday afternoon reruns. There's a snippet of dialogue from the movie which has worked its way into the culture and has appeared in numerous shows subsequent. Nick Grindle, who is the bad guy in the movie, says, "I'm getting tired of your meddling. This town ain't big enough for the both of us." That's right. "And I'm going to give you 24 hours to get out. If I see you in Carbinius by this time tomorrow, it's you or me." And Tim Barrett, of course, who's the good guy, says, "I'll see you at this time tomorrow." Yeah. This town ain't big enough for the both of us. This life ain't big enough for both foolishness and wisdom. They can't both occupy the same space at the same time. Something has got to go, preferably the simplistic or foolish ways, according to the proverb. This is actually a very fascinating block that's wedged here in Proverbs 9. It is a summary dialogue of a collection of Proverbs that we find in chapter 1, verse 8 through chapter 9, verse 18. It's the opening discourse for the entire book. And it's kind of the preface to all the pithy sayings that we usually think of as being Proverbs. And it's usually labeled something like a father's advice to a son. Or in the ABP, the authorized Boydston paraphrase, the dialogue is labeled, "Choose your woman well." Wisdom is personified as a woman, as seen here in verses 9, 1 through, or chapter 9, verses 1 through 6. But folly is also personified as a woman, as seen in the parallel passage, chapter 9, verses 13 through 18. So if you want to do something more with this afternoon, you can look up chapter 9, 13 to 18 and see, and line it up with 1 through 6, and you'll see the parallels between those two little dialogues that are going on there. And really, it's not just intended to be advice to young men. That's just the literary device for this. It's equally applicable to all people, young, old, male, female. We need to displace simplistic living with wisdom because there is no room for foolishness in a wise and godly life. That's a key point this morning. If you're jotting these things down in the message guide, we need to displace simplistic living with wisdom because there is no room for foolishness in a wise and godly life. Notice I'm not saying simple living, but simplistic. Simple living is a good thing. It's a characteristic of a godly life, to live simply. But simplistic suggests shallowness. And by the way, simplistic is our English power word of the week for those that are building an English vocabulary. Simplistic means lacking understanding. Simplistic means it's not well thought out. It means that there's a willingness to accept easy answers just because they are easy. Or to continue the metaphor from this block of Proverbs, to go after easy women. That's foolish. Your life ain't big enough for both foolishness and wisdom. There's not room in your life for both. They can't occupy the same space. So, I started making a list of some of the ideas or behaviors which might be considered simplistic or foolish, and which should be abandoned so that they can be replaced with wisdom. And I'll share my list, and then I'll invite you to add to it with your own ideas in here. One, we need to abandon the idea, first of all, that we can have a pleasant yard without yard work. Right? Are you catching how this thing flows? Or two, we need to abandon the idea that we can ignore the oil changes and still keep the engine running. Number three, we need to abandon the idea that we can climb Mount Everest without ever training. Number four, we need to abandon the idea that I can buy every ukulele which catches my fancy and still stay financially solvent. Number five, we need to abandon the idea that we can receive forgiveness without forgiving.
Number 6, we can still have a lot to eat but without work.
We can still have a lot to give but without.
We can have a lot to eat, anything we can eat, but without work.
We can have a lot to eat but without work. Okay. That's 6. Okay, so number 7 on my list is that we can spend all of our time in mindless activity and maintain sharp minds. Number 8, we need to abandon the idea that we can freely pollute God's creation and live blessed in a clean and healthy environment. Number 9, hold on to it.
Yes.
Number 9, we need to abandon the idea that we can spend all of our money on amusements that we deserve. We deserve amusement and still have enough saved for retirement. Number 10, we need to abandon the idea that we can chase skirts and still have a stable family. Number 11, we need to abandon the idea that we can fill our lives with noise and still have peace to think. Number 12, we need to abandon the idea that we can say whatever comes to mind and still expect others to pay attention to us. Okay, so who else has got? Maybe you've got another one now.
We can still get health without exercise.
We need to abandon the idea that we can be healthy without exercise. Who else has got one? Manny's got one. I see the brain working there.
You get over the idea that you can't drive a car without putting fuel in it.
We need to abandon the idea that you can drive a car without putting fuel in it. Okay? Someone else have an example of this kind of line of thinking.
We can walk 24 hours without sleeping.
We need to abandon the idea that we can be healthy people and work 24 hours without sleeping. Someone else was starting there.
That we can truly give love to others before first learning to truly love ourselves.
that we can truly give love to others without first learning to love ourselves. What else is coming? These are ideas which need to be abandoned in order to live wisely, because there is not enough room for both to coexist. So, I suspect that we'd all agree that there are certain behaviors and certain kinds of patterns of thinking that we need to dump in order to allow the life of Christ to live through us, right? Does that make sense? Do you agree? Yeah. But what is it that keeps us from jettisoning foolishness and simplistic ideas? What is it that keeps us from dumping? Actually, I mean, we know we should do this. We know that we can't have wisdom living in us and foolishness living within us, and yet we still have foolishness that pops up. What is it that keeps us from dumping the foolishness out, from throwing it out? And I want to suggest 4 ideas. Number 1, many of us suffer from overinflated self-confidence. We suffer from overinflated self-confidence. And you know, May talked about the idea that you can work 24 hours and still stay healthy if you don't sleep. Well, that's kind of related to this. This is the idea that I'm invincible, right? I'm superhuman. I can handle this. I can play with fire and never get burned. That might happen to others, but not to me because, well, I'm Superman. I know you don't know that because I wear a costume underneath. Yeah, but I mean, if I took this shirt off, you would know that I'm really Superman. Well, when I was a boy, my father told me a story from the newspaper about another boy my age on the other side of town, and he was playing Superman, and he had a cape, and I mean, he had the whole getup and everything, and he climbed up onto the second-story roof of his house in order to jump off, imitating his invincible superhero. And when he jumped off the roof to fly, his cape failed, and he did not survive the jump. I doubt that my father remembers telling me that story, but it left an impression on me that I remember to this day.
He needed a green cape.
He needed a green cape?
Maybe he tried it in green.
Oh, if it was green, lime green, that would have done it. Now, good thing you didn't suggest that to me when I was 5.
It wasn't my idea. It's coming from the peanut gallery back here.
Oh, well, that's good. It's good. I like the peanut gallery. I'm sure that my father was quite concerned with me in telling me that story, because when I was that age, I was a bit more active than most children, and I had a wild imagination, and I did not have very much, how should we put it, impulse control, which is a dangerous combination for a kindergartner. But in my mind, I was very invincible. I could not be hurt. And some of us never grow out of our illusion of invincibility. We just translate it into different realms of life. There are still middle-aged guys trying to recapture their youth, doing dangerous things in relationships and otherwise, acting as though they are invincible, as though they can be stable and respected people, but with a secret wild side. I'll tell you a secret. That never works. And while most of us grow out of this kind of thing, not all of us do. Are you suffering from overinflated self-confidence? In order to dump the simplistic things in your life, you need to get real and address that issue. Secondly, and this is very closely related, some of us hold on to foolish ideas or assumptions because we fail to mature, or we don't mature evenly. That is, we have pockets of foolishness or pockets of immaturity that we've held on to. When we were living in California, I spent some time out at the local Teen Challenge Ranch. They'd often invite the local ministers out there for a meal and a program, and the residents would stand up in a group, and they would sing songs for us, and we would sit and eat with them, and I had a lot of interaction with residents of the Teen Challenge Ranch, all of whom were dealing with a history of substance abuse. And I think it's interesting that the organization is called Teen Challenge, but most of the men living there were in their 20s or even their 30s, and yet they all carried themselves like they were 13 or 14-year-olds. When they would stand up to sing, they didn't have the confidence, they didn't have the stature, they didn't have the eye contact, they didn't have the sense of an adult. They were in certain ways socially stunted, perhaps stuck back at the point when they jumped the rail. There were things that they had not matured out of. There were pockets of immaturity which led to bigger problems later on. Even though they were adults, they still made foolish adolescent jokes or did things to get attention, the kinds of things that adolescents would do, and there was low impulse control. In some ways, they were very stuck. And the first step to overcoming this kind of immaturity, the kind of immaturity that keeps us from jettisoning foolishness, is self-awareness. Once we become aware of this weakness, we can start to tune into the pattern in our lives. And then we can ask God to heal us of it. Thirdly, some of us hold on to foolish ideas or assumptions because we're using those things to medicate the pain in our lives. We're using those things to medicate the pain in our lives. Most every day I'm out on the street out here in Laveen on my bike, and I frequently stop to talk with people on the street, people that are just kind of hanging out at the bus stops or hanging out in spots. I just stop and try to talk with them and keep just this ongoing conversation with people going. And I'll tell you, I talk to a lot of inebriated people. People who are trying to treat the pain and disappointment in life with alcohol or with drugs. They are not terrible people, by the way. Not at all. They're just trying to get relief from the pain of failure, relief from the pain or the hurt of broken relationships, or just disappointment in life that things have not turned out the way that they thought they should. And they're hurting about it, and they're just trying to find something that will make them feel better. And they mostly know that their medicine is only compounding the problem, but they just haven't figured out what will work or how to unload the foolishness. So they keep doing what they know. Now, I don't want to give the impression that substance abuse is the only way, or even the primary way, that we self-medicate. Some of us do the same thing by bouncing from relationship to relationship, or we get thrills by hooking up endlessly, or we can't stop eating, or others enjoy feeling the power that comes with being abusive. I would argue that abusive people are in this way. They are feeling a rush when they have control over somebody else, when they can express their anger. It just gives them a sense of a rush. Or some lose themselves in video games. Others become thrill seekers. They become adrenaline junkies. The fact is, though, that this kind of medicine is worse than the disease. It's a part of the foolishness that keeps us from growing in wisdom and understanding, from becoming the kinds of people that God has created us to be. Wisdom itself is much more effective at treating the pain of life. And that's the point of the Proverbs. Pseudo-medicine only creates more problems, and you never can get yourself back on track in life. So quit doing the things which only firm up your place among the dead. If you note on the message guide, I put down verse 18, which we didn't read, but which is a part of the parallel passage between the part we read was the house of wisdom, and then there's the house of folly. And this is a part of the house of folly, and there's a meal in the house of wisdom, and there's a meal in the house of folly. And then it says at the end of that section on the house of folly, about the guests, but they don't know that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of the grave. They don't know when you eat the meal, accept the invitation of the house of folly. You don't realize when you sit down to eat that you're surrounded by dead people. That's the gist of it. Fourthly, some of us hold on to foolish ideas or assumptions because we have not yet let wisdom capture our hearts. We've not yet let wisdom capture our hearts. And by wisdom, I'm thinking of the ultimate man of wisdom, the Son of God, Christ Jesus. Or as he's called in the Gospel, John chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, which can be roughly translated as the wisdom of God. For Christ abandoned his place of comfort so that he could come rescue us from our addiction to sin. And in our gospel text from John 6, Jesus says that he is the living bread from heaven. And then he invites people to eat his flesh and to drink his blood. And that was, I tell you right out, that was for his initial audience. When they heard him say that, they were shocked. That was a very dramatic thing to say. It was attention-getting. It was a way of saying that he, the bread, the word, the wisdom, wants a place in our lives. He is trying to capture our imaginations. He is trying to capture our hearts. And the point is that if we make our lives all about Jesus, who he is, what he has done, what he is doing, his wise presence in our lives displaces the foolishness. The presence of Jesus in our lives pushes out the foolishness. The more of Jesus we allow into our lives, the more he nudges out the foolishness. And that's got to be our primary strategy for getting rid of foolishness in our lives. For as soon as we give Christ a true foothold in our lives, he starts to confront the simplistic behaviors and patterns. And as soon as foolishness or immaturity surfaces in our lives, as immaturity and foolishness occasionally does, even among the most seasoned of believers, there are things that pop up at the weirdest times, and as soon as they pop up, as they occasionally do, he faces them down. This life ain't big enough for the both of us. For there really isn't room for both godly wisdom and foolish simplicity in your life. It's got to be one or the other. And Jesus, partnering with the Holy Spirit, runs the foolishness out of our lives so we can truly live. And that is the good news.